How and why did the founders create America's system of federalism? How does federalism limit the powers of both the national and state governments? How does federalism extend opportunities for citizen participation? When you are ready, you may begin.
In his 1981 inaugural address, Ronald Reagan stated, "All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. The dichotomy between the national and state governments is a defining feature of the American system of government. Historical failures of both the unitary and confederate systems encouraged the creation of federalism."
Following the French and Indian War, Great Britain was left with a staggering debt. As their economy stagnated, they were forced to turn to the colonies for money. Revenue-raising measures like the Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 enraged the colonists. These taxes, along with a perceived lack of representation, pushed the colonies to revolution. When they were finally free from the restraint of the British central government, the colonies joined together in a confederation. However, this proved to be a remarkable failure.
The Articles of Confederation left no way for Congress to enforce laws, make foreign policy decisions, create a standing national army, or provide a source of revenue. This limited power meant the national government could not even control a simple protest. Shays' Rebellion was a protest caused by the post-war economic crisis. It was unable to be quickly stopped because they could not assemble the states' armies and no national army existed.
After experiencing the failures of both a unitary system and a confederation, the founders recognized the need for change. They created a system of government known as federalism, which is the division of power between the central government and state or local governments. That combines aspects of both unitary and confederation systems. Wanting certain powers to remain with the national government and certain powers with the state governments, limits were placed on both in both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Alexander Hamilton once explained, "It's not tyranny we desire, it's a just, limited federal government." The framers of the Constitution shared Hamilton's desires and wanted to preserve state power. The 10th Amendment is the clearest example of this. It ensures that the Constitution only defines the limits on states, not their powers. Article 1, Section 10 enumerates some of these limits. States are prohibited from coining money, entering war, and creating treaties. Article 4, Section 1 and 2 force states to respect contracts under the full faith and credit clause. The 14th Amendment, Section 1, specifies that states shall not make or enforce any law which would abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens. While the states seem to have many restrictions, they pale in comparison to the federal government. Article 1, Section 8 states that the national government may only take certain actions.
Unlike the states, Congress is limited to the powers given to them by the Constitution. This has allowed for states to expand jurisdiction and provide more diversity of law. For example, marriage is never mentioned in the Constitution, making it a states' right. Currently, only 9 states allow same-sex marriage. Only because of the system of federalism is this diversity possible. However, in the 1987 case, South Dakota v. Dole, the 10th Amendment and thus the power of the states were limited. The federal government is able to place conditions on the states if it qualifies under these 4 restrictions. The condition must be unambiguous, promote the general welfare, relate to the federal interest, and conform to the 10th Amendment's reservation of powers to the states.
Civic participation is a basic right that can be used in one of the 87,909 governments in the United States. One of the most common forms comes from by voting for representatives in these different levels. This gives the public a more personalized connection to their policymakers. The First Amendment allows people to petition and assemble. Occupy Wall Street is a protest currently going on about wealth inequality and political corruption. On November 19th, Occupy Wall Street is planning a movement to help the less privileged communities hit by Superstorm Sandy.
Jury duty allows citizens to be part of the judicial process by utilizing the opportunity to aid government in giving citizens a fair trial. These are just a few of the many ways for citizens to actively participate in federalism. New York Congressman Charles Rangel once stated, "Full participation in government and society has been a basic right of the country, symbolizing the full citizenship and equal protection of all." Thank you.
If the state government refuses to allow a legitimate national law, what remedies does the federal government have to force the state to abide by the Supremacy Clause?
One of the initial actions the state can take, or the federal government can take, is to withdraw funding for the states. For a good example would be education policy. If the states didn't want to conform to the No Child Left Behind Act or Obama's Race to the Top program, the federal government could quickly withdraw federal funding and sort of coerce the states into following the national desires.
Or we can look to when can't remember the state, but when a state decided not to enforce the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, Truman sent troops into the city to ensure that the decision was enforced within the city.
Little Rock, Arkansas.
That's what
In
That's right.
addition to that, Congress has power of the Commerce Clause. So this deal, if this issue, if it was ever between state to state, the federal government has the ultimate ruling in that problem
How?
because of the Commerce Clause.
Great. That's a words on a piece of paper. All right. What is the idea of police powers under the 10th Amendment?
Can you repeat the question? Or rephrase the question?
What are police powers? What's the understanding of police powers? How do police powers work for states under the 10th Amendment?
Police are the enforcement of the state laws, not the federal laws, so they work with the state's constitution, enforcing those laws.
How does the creation of the Senate uphold the ideas of federalism?
Originally, the Senate was based on representation from state legislatures. It was only in the 17th Amendment when we started electing them. So originally, the senators were designed to be the state's check on national powers, the states having clear control over the national government and having a real effect in Congress, and the fact that it's not based on proportional representation gave all states an equal chance.
In what ways does the Electoral College show the importance of federalism?
The Electoral College shows the importance of federalism because it shows instead of the minority of the country or the majority of the country winning the election, it's the majority of each state, so each state has its own power within the election. And then it shows more emphasis towards the swing states, so the
Excuse me.
candidates can focus on those swing parts of the country.
A good example of this might be Washoe County in our state. For the last election, we saw several appearances by the vice presidential candidates, several appearances by the presidential candidates, and lots of media attention. Nevada has about 2 million people in it, and the Reno-Sparks metropolitan area has at most 400,000. A similarly sized place or city in a reliably democratic state like New York or California did not receive that attention from either the president. And it's these big states that are not as essential because of the Electoral College. It allows all states to have more of an equal playing field and doesn't advantage the population over states' rights.
What role did the 16th Amendment have in changing the relationship between the national government and the state government?
Well, the 16th Amendment, which is the national income tax, was the first time the government had ever done any action of that scope and scale that extended across all state lines. It was a unprecedented action.
How does federalism complicate the idea of higher law?
Federalism complicates the idea of higher law. For example, the debate on whether the Supremacy Clause goes above the 10th Amendment. Therefore, it's the debate on whether the federal laws go over the state laws, for example, in like gay marriage, whether if the federal government made a law banning gay marriage, would the states have to follow that, or could they keep their laws keeping gay marriage legal?
Another example of that would be the marijuana passed by initiative in both Colorado and Washington. Because it defies an act made by the federal government, it's a question of whether there is actually a higher law by the federal government or whether states are the laboratories of democracy and they're defying that law.
Another example of this is when Obamacare was ultimately originally tested in Massachusetts, and now it is,
Romney care.
yes, well, first Romneycare, now Obamacare, and is now being applied to our nation.
We'll stop there on time. I think we're over. Yeah, all right. First, don't call it Obamacare. Call it the Affordable Care Act,
Okay.
because you're going to offend a judge. Don't try to be as apolitical. This goes for all Affordable Care Act or the Healthcare Initiative. Okay, and it goes for both sides. You're gonna have people who are gonna swing right, and if you say something that sounds too liberal, you're gonna open a can of worms. If you say you're gonna have a member of the ACLU there, and you're gonna say something that's too conservative or restricting, and you're gonna, I mean, while it is not subjective, it's still subjective. So just be careful on that.
Okay.
Okay, and even though our two presidential candidates called it Obamacare and belittled it to that much, I think it's stupid. So don't use it. It's the Affordable Care Act.
Okay.
All right. It's just I don't know. I promise. But it's also inappropriate. It's not Obamacare. It's the Affordable Care Act. All right. If anything, let's call it Truman Care, because he came up with it first. 3:58 on. 3:58 on time, which is good. This goes for both groups. Don't be in the middle of your presentation reading something and saying, and as James Madison quoted in Federalist 51, and then go to the next page.
Know what you're
Huh?
gonna say. Like, know what you're gonna say. So.
Or have it, or set up your part so that it's all on one spot. Even if, and this is something else that, however you guys want to do it, if you just want it on pieces of paper like you have it, great. If you want it on big cue cards and you have your part already set up, great. Whatever it is you want to do to have it for your testimonies is totally up to you. Okay, there's no uniform. It's by unit by unit. So federalism is in play. If laboratory presentation. The only thing you cannot use is any electronic devices. So however you want, but make sure it's all on one page so you're not flipping. Jack, read your section on Shays again, please.
Just the Shays part.
Yeah.
The limited power meant the national government could not even control a simple protest. Shays' Rebellion was a protest caused by the...
Okay, stop. Cannot even control a simple protest. Shays' Rebellion was a protest. It's awkward.
Okay.
Get rid of protest. Shays' Rebellion was a conflict. Use a different word. Sydney, read your Occupy part.
Occupy Wall Street is a protest currently going on about welcome.
Okay, it's an ongoing protest. Occupy Wall Street is an ongoing protest. Now, Sydney, you started, right? It went Sydney, Chase, Jack, Sarah.
Yeah.
Then it needs to continue Sydney, Chase, Jack, Sarah.
Okay.
So whatever you start, I don't care if you, I mean, I would prefer straight down the line, but if you're gonna bounce, okay, boom, 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 then it's gotta go back to boom and stay in the same order. All right, so keep your same order. All right. How can states, what course of action does the government have for refusing legitimate laws? No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top are not laws. They're mandates. And because they're mandates, yes, they can take away funds, but states can refuse them outright because they're not laws. There's no punitive damage to that. So you got to make sure one of the big things you got to understand, and something we'll talk about more, is this idea of difference between mandates, unfunded mandates, requirements that states have to do that all come through money, and laws. Because there's a much bigger difference in that. Go.
Is the Affordable Care Act mandate? or-
No, it's a law.
It's a law.
It's a law.
So the
It's a
states
law.
have to mandate.
States have to do it, yes, and there's penalties, stiffer penalties for them not doing it. Okay, and that's and those are actions. Whereas the state of Nevada, No Child Left Behind is a mandate. It's not a law. The federal government has no control over education. We don't care. But states usually don't do that because of the 16th Amendment, which is the last question. The 16th Amendment really changes the relationship because the federal government has a lot more money to make states do things. What's the national drinking age? You're all wrong. There's no national drinking age. States set drinking age, but the federal government, through unfunded mandates, has given a really strong suggestion.
Well, it's become 21 because.
So Alaska doesn't get, because didn't Alaska change it to 18?
It's still 21 or 8.
I thought-
But then,
It's there. What?
if it's 21 everywhere, can that be the national age?
There is no national age.
So don't they?
That's the point. It's not done by national law. It's done through a federal mandate.
So basically you could say 2I's, like name every state's law.
Yeah, it's state law, it's highly suggested by federal government. What is the blood alcohol level for DUI?
0.08.
I can't have anything to drink anymore.
0.08.
0.08. Once again, that's set by federal mandate, not by state law. Okay? So those are things that have come in place. No Child Left Behind is a mandate of national education, but it's the states can ignore it if they wish.
So what's a good example of a law then,
Affordable Care Act.
that states are actively subverting?
Correct. Well, yes, and there's some penalty. There's going to be stiff penalties for the 3 states that are still going to outright defy it.
Oh,
Which is
Which are,
Missouri.
I just heard this. Yeah, Missouri. I just heard this morning too. Yeah, Missouri. I can't remember the other ones. Okay, so there's that fight. That's federalism in its swing. Sarah, Commerce Clause is.
we were just talking about, I was just trying to
That's
throw
okay.
something in there.
Jack, good example of bringing the national rules for segregation, right? So that's a good one. Other enforcements the states can do is they can essentially force states through the Supreme Court to take actions through the court system, and if they want to, they can arrest federal officials for not upholding it.
Is there like an example of that in the Supreme Court's?
That I gotta look at. I don't know any examples of that. That's the first time I've ever asked that question because I really liked it.
Because I can't think of it.
I can't think of it either, but it was number 20 on the 4th page of Cross-Ex.
what did Jackson do during like the nullification crisis?
I'm gonna threaten to bring the military down.
Could that be an example?
Totally example. Right? Civil War, I'm bringing the Union back through military actions. Abraham Lincoln. Police powers is the fact that states can create their own laws. Okay, so what's the speed limit in the school zone?
It differs from state to state.
Different from state to state. That's police powers. Okay, there's a speed limit in my grandparent-in-law's road that the speed limit is 17.5 miles an hour.
Why isn't it reserved powers? Like, isn't that what?
That's the same thing.
Okay.
Oh.
But reserve powers are bigger. Police powers are things that, so for example, when we talked about compelling state interest,
Right.
right? Whether or not state of Texas's law of burning flags, that's a police power. But do they have a compelling state interest to create that police power?
No.
Okay, the fact that Iowa, for having an ounce of marijuana as a felony in California, it's a $90 ticket. Those are police powers. The fact that the state of Nevada has no appellate court system, and most other states do, those are police powers. So it's the power of the states to create laws and punishments for crimes, defining what things are crimes, what's a misdemeanor, what's a gross misdemeanor, if they have the death penalty or not, what the death penalty is going to be, what the fines are going to be. Those are all ideas of police powers. Versus reserve powers, which are education, healthcare, roads, infrastructure, what towns look like, sewers, have nothing to do with criminal activity, but are still things states have to do. Does that make sense? We'll talk more about the Electoral College. 16th Amendment we got to, and higher law. 10th Amendment versus Supremacy Clause is a good answer. Colorado's a good answer. Sarah, what'd you say for that last question?
Affordable Care Act.
Oh yeah, Affordable Care Act. That's also a good example of those things. And going into the ideas of laboratories of democracy. Make sure you get to the point faster. Biggest thing for all groups is practice testimonies. Okay? Last ones. Go. Big time.
On a question like what are police powers, if one person